G'day everyone, welcome to video 4. This one is on productivity and how that relates to modern monetary economics. Money in the economy is like a wheel with really good bearings. Once injected in there and it's spinning around, it just keeps going around and around. As we've discussed previously, it's the government's job to ensure the money in circulation is in balance with the productive capacity of the economy. There are certain situations though, that demand increases in the money, and we've discussed two of these in the earlier videos. They are when the economy has a utilisation gap and when it has expanded productive capacity. These situations are pretty cool because they allow new money created spending to be done, so no tax required. There's a third situation that allows this money injection, and that's the one we'll talk about today. It's when there's a productivity increase in the economy. A way to understand how this works is to just consider the outputs, that is, things produced, for the same amount of inputs for a low productivity and a high productivity situation. In the high productivity situation, we will have more outputs, and so more things are produced for purchase in the economy, and so more spending is needed to match up with this. So modern monetary economics' view of productivity is a bit larger and more diverse than the academic definitions associated with mainstream economics. People are a large factor in the modern monetary economics version of events, and it differs somewhat to the mainstream view, so it's worth taking a quick look at both versions. Mainstream economics takes a dim view of people, that they are basically anti-work, and that this sentiment never changes and is only ever overcome by offering an incentive that offsets this. That offset is the pay they receive. If you want more interest and motivation towards their work, you pay them more. Modern monetary economics doesn't usually drill down into the low-level and detailed individual person-related parts of economics. It is mostly about high-level economics, but implicitly it views people that if they are provided with conditions that get them into good condition physically and mentally, that people will inadvertently share this in whatever they're doing at the time, with their level of pay only being partly a factor. If people will naturally pass on the benefits of improved conditions of their health and mind to businesses and organisations and things in the economy generally, and this then makes more spending power available to the government, then it makes sense to turn this into a bit of a virtuous feedback cycle by then using some of that spending power back into looking after people's health and minds. We can take a similar view with capital equipment, plant and machinery in the economy. The healthier and smarter we can keep the equipment, the more productive they'll be, and, same deal, turn it into a virtuous cycle. We don't always have to use the full spending power created by extra productivity on more productivity. A proportion is needed to create the cycle, but plenty can go towards other pursuits, like solving society's problems, whatever they may be. To do our first illustration of this concept of everything counts towards productivity, let's look at something which is basically the opposite of work, sleep, and see how even that matters. In case you didn't think sleep mattered to productivity, do a quick Google search. There will be no shortage of articles on its effects. The amount of sleep, the quality of sleep, makes a difference to people's mental condition, and the quality of the sleeping surface makes a difference to people's physical condition. The physical one is easy to understand. If you have a chronic sore back, it will be harder to do physical work as effectively. Even just the discomfort can distract you and make you make more mistakes than you otherwise would. With the amount of sleep, there is plenty of research into how sleep helps memory, which translates into how much of some skills you learnt the previous day that you will retain. All these little things add up. Multiply this by the whole population, and it makes a clear difference. Modern monetary economics will pick this up in a shift in the current position on the utilisation inflation curve, allowing greater new money spending or suppressed inflation for the same level of spending. Mainstream economics only counts sleep indirectly, as though, because your job and wage are important to you, and you don't want to risk being fired, you'll get enough sleep to perform well enough to avoid it. Despite the well-documented advantages in work performance when the population gets a good sleep, almost no companies give incentives or rewards for getting a good sleep, and I'm not aware of any governments giving tax breaks for good sleeping habits. I admit measuring sleep performance is a little bit difficult, so there's that excuse, but really, in the age of Fitbits and phone apps that use sensors to detect sleeping patterns, someone could solve this. If we want to get a good understanding of the value of productivity, it's instructive to look at some examples of countries that are less productive. A friend of mine invested in a company in Brazil. He used to get regular updates on the company, read their reports, and was able to get a bit of extra information from social media. It highlights some of the issues with things we just take as a given in Australia. One of the biggest disruptions was when there were fuel shortages due to striking truck drivers who were striking over the price of fuel. Imagine trying to run a mining operation without any diesel to run the machines. What do you do with the people you have employed? If you pay them, you lose money. If you lay them off, you lose experience and skills and then have to rebuild it. Imagine getting the flu 7 times a year, every year. This is life in a country where malaria is common. Imagine the Australian workforce laid up for 4 to 14 weeks per year sick. Imagining your business has only one person with some key skill and they're the one who gets sick for 4 weeks. How can you work in an environment like this? I know that malaria isn't an easily treatable issue, but I'm just using an extreme case to highlight how important good health is for productivity. Just having people who feel plain old okay. They don't have to be super happy, just not unwell at all, just normal. This is an important thing for a good economy. I know of a country that had agriculture as the dominant sector in the economy. It fought an internal war, and the losers, who were farmers, were stripped of their land and farms. These were awarded to the generals and key people from the military that won. However, none of these people knew about how to farm, and as a result, the productivity of the farms plummeted, and this loss of productivity caused a massive disruption in the economy. You may have heard of this country. It's Zimbabwe. The collapse of productivity requires a collapse in the amount of money in circulation, which in turn requires massive tax hikes, or it will result in runaway inflation. Either way, the economy suffers badly. On the flip side, the examples of systems of other countries which are more productive than our own give a clue where we could get more productivity. Japan's public transport system is impeccable, well known for how on time it is and how clean. This means everyone can plan around arriving where they want to, when they want to. Public transport is a far more fuel and resource efficient means of moving people too, especially compared to using private vehicles. Finland's education system is a result of a long-held positive attitude towards education. Their efforts to keep it in excellent condition don't waver. They set long-term goals and they stick to them. All political parties have a commitment to the cause, as do the public. They use science and data to guide them as what is best to do. Denmark's health system currently performs similar to Australia's. It's likely to surpass ours in the future though, especially in cost terms, because they looked at the data and projections showing where the health system was likely to go, and they concluded a hospital-based centralised system wasn't going to be effective. They've actually closed down 60 out of their 90 big hospitals and opened a geographically distributed set of small clinics, but each is quite advanced and able to offer, for example, a range of lab analyses almost in real time, which the doctors at the clinics can then use to mostly come up with a treatment where the person never needs to go into hospital. This saves time and effort on travelling and accommodation, keeps hospital beds free, keeps patients near their support networks, and overall is a more productive mode of caring. These things are all similar to what was done across the world after World War II, where publicly provided services in health and education were expanded and improved, and systems of organising society and our institutions were also rationalised. We can just quickly review some major areas of the improvements in this period to highlight what I'm talking about. First, we'll discuss the expansion of public institutions, services and protections. There existed public hospitals prior to the war, but we expanded and improved them, and then eventually in 1984 introduced the Medicare system and had not just public hospitals, but a full publicly funded health system. We already had public schooling, but in the early 1970s, Whitlam introduced publicly funded higher education. Also in the 1970s, federal and state governments injected a lot of money into public schools to upgrade equipment and facilities. One of the most significant things was the Re-establishment and Employment Act, which basically said that returned service people had to be given a job. In the period from the end of the war to the early 1970s, Australian unemployment sat around 2%, which is unheard of today. This system eventually evolved into the Commonwealth Employment Service, and people who couldn't find work were given protective payments until they were able to find some. These changes produced much increased productivity by people and helped our economy to perform much better than it would have had none of these changes been made. Another major area of improvement was infrastructure. I don't know how many people these days have had the experience of driving machinery or even a car on dirt roads, but they are much less conducive to productivity than sealed roads. On sealed roads you can drive in all weather conditions. You can go faster, but be safer because of the improved grip, which allows you to steer and brake much better. There are less harsh bumps, rocks, gutters, washouts and vibrations, which means less maintenance on your vehicle over its life. Similarly, good electricity generation and distribution allows access to an energy supply that can be converted to do many jobs easily by a range of modern equipment. Again, I don't think many Australians would understand what it's like to be without this stuff. I've seen what it's like when none of this exists. Everything is done manually, taking time and wearing you out. You carry water back and forth from tanks to the house, filling the carro tank on a carro fridge, lighting lamps at night, being careful not to knock the damn things over and cause a fire. The construction of Australia's electricity network was completed before even my earliest memories, and so it just amazes me to drive out in rural and regional Australia and see the power lines everywhere, with one going to every farmhouse. It's an amazing piece of work when you think about it, as is all of our infrastructure achievements really, and they've all helped us to have a very productive economy as a result. For years, even in dry Australia, drinking water was ubiquitous, but we are now seeing, with the extreme drought we're having, how helpful potable water is by seeing the effects of its absence. Stuff that could be done just isn't when there isn't the water. Australia was never a particularly lawless country, and people have generally been cooperative with one another. However, I think we've maintained, for most of our history, a very good system of fairness in Australia. Between the rules, policing and courts, most of us can get fair treatment most of the time. Compare this with some developing countries, where corruption is rife and the people have far less impetus to contribute to whatever, as they know that the products of their contribution is likely to be siphoned off by the corrupt. Journalism is another form of accountability that we need to keep the rulemakers uncorrupted. Until recently, we've done well at that. Similarly, we have branches of government designed to protect us as consumers, which in turn encourages that we live in a system where we can get what is reasonable and make us willing to contribute back in. We set up agencies like customs as another form of protection, keeping our country free of diseases, pests and other hazardous things which may damage our productivity, amongst other things. The last area we'll look at in this set is around compatibility and the generation of protective cultures. So it helps when rules and setups are similar within a country. Similar road rules prevent accidents from confusion. You only need to look at some of the videos that circulate on the internet of road accidents in other countries to make you grateful for how good our system is here. Having minimum requirements for safety that are legally enforceable helps stop people from being hurt, putting them out of the workforce and rendering them unproductive for a period. Similarly, cultures of protection were helpful and are helpful for productivity. Environmental protection culture isn't all about protecting forests from logging. It includes things like making sure waterways, especially ones destined for drinking water, aren't polluted. It means that dodgy developers can't just build housing lots on top of waste dumps where toxic chemicals can leach up and into the people, and so on and so forth. I've left off discussing the job guarantee for a bit to allow some attention to be drawn to the rest of the conversation. That said, the job guarantee is a mega productivity booster. 7 out of 10 people currently unemployed would take up the employment if given a chance. In Australia, this amounts to at least 400,000 full-time workers in the job guarantee. In terms of productivity, we will get the benefits from whatever work they do, be that reducing waste, fixing a poorly performing community item. It may be as simple as a rusted gate to installing and maintaining sprinklers at a community sporting facility. Plus there's a myriad more ways in which their work will increase productivity, but that's really only half the story, and possibly the less significant half. The other half is the benefits of the increased health of the participants and their family. Just by going from unemployment to employment with a steady, reliable wage and having the security of knowing you have an ongoing job. These sorts of things reduce stress in the family and allow them to go from thinking about the here and the now, the next bill, fuel in the car, paying for tomorrow's food, to starting to think longer term and bigger picture. And inevitably, some of that is about their children's future, their education, their health and well-being. If someone who's never been employed can be employed under the job guarantee, then they will obviously gain a range of skills needed and used in work. And it is this increase in skills from the job guarantee that represents another big opportunity for productivity improvement. It wouldn't be unreasonable to use the job guarantee people as cover for fire service volunteers when they go away to fight fires, as is happening currently. The job guarantee people could, as part of their jobs, participate in training with Australian Fire Services on firefighting and be like a reserve army of firefighters. The job guarantee employees could also be used as cover for the fireys that have travelled away. This ensures that those businesses with fireys don't lose productivity when they leave, or at least as much, and having more fireys free to go would help save more bush and property from damage. After the fire has passed, job guarantee people could help communities with recovering and rebuilding work too. Back on the children of the families of job guarantee participants for a second, we know from studies done already that these children will go far better in their educational lives than in the lives they would have had if their parents were in financially precarious positions. This, in time, will translate into a further massive boost in productivity when they enter the workforce. This education I'm talking about for these kids doesn't just have to be purely the traditional school learning. It can just be in being open-minded to learning new things, or byproduct learning from being able to pursue their interests better. Remember, in productivity, everything counts. The job guarantee is gold when it comes to productivity. It will result in a large quantum improvement leap. So we're coming to the close. So I just want to use the next part to just make explicit some things which harm productivity and some things which help. Some things that hurt productivity is a list of things I've alluded to before and some ad hoc new ones that I thought might be worth knowing. People dying. Sorry to sound so clinical here, but assuming they're not really old, then you've lost someone who you've kept healthy, educated, skilled up, and who is a support to people around them. Someone dying is one of the biggest damages of productivity there is. This is why good road laws, healthcare and health education are very important. Similarly, but less severe, sick people and unhealthy people decrease economic productivity. A damaged natural environment decreases its productive potential. This can be things like topsoil erosion, invasive pests, all things that decrease agricultural productivity, if nothing else. Lack of preparedness, like for natural disasters, makes the damage far greater. It's like comparing the damage from cyclones in Western Australia and Northern Territory, which have had special building codes for 40 years, versus the damage in the US where, until 2002, there was no code at all. Even now in the US, it's a piecemeal code. Employee turnover is an obvious problem. People come into the business and learn the skills and the knowledge of that workplace, but if they just leave again soon after, the process has to be repeated and it's a waste. There's a bunch more on the list you can look at yourself, but lastly I might just mention a lack of fun. Yes, even having workplaces and an organisation where humour is low causes people to work less vigorously and effectively than they otherwise might. Remember, everything counts. Some things that help productivity. Reducing waste, and this isn't just like how much rubbish you make. It can be wasted time, it can be off-spec products in a production process and so on. Doing more things in the same time is an obvious way to help productivity, but sometimes you need to do the opposite. An example is with doctors today. With the amount of people they are trying to get through, we may be better off and get more productivity from slowing them down, as people will get better results. This would of course require a greater number of doctors if there is no change in the number of patients, but the public purse can provide for this if the overall productivity benefit for the whole economy equals or outweighs the cost of decreasing the number of patients seen in a given time. Mistakes are part of being human. However, there are things we know which can make us make more mistakes, such as stress, lack of sleep, lack of motivation, etc. Keeping the condition of things more even is a better way to run them. Letting something run down is normally a really unproductive way to go about things, as getting them back up to their original standard again normally requires 3 to 4 times what was saved when you cut things and caused it to go downhill. Prevention is better than cure is a wise saying. It works with productivity as well. Much better to avoid problems in the first place than make up for them once they've occurred. Having people and businesses which are cool with the changing world is also normally good for productivity. They'll be the ones who best introduce new ideas and equipment in. A quick case study. In the grain growing area of the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia, there has for some time been a network of railway systems carrying the grain to port for shipping. The railway line and operations were privatised some time ago. This season the company decided, for reasons that still aren't totally clear, that they were not going to operate and that they were effectively mothballing the railway line and taking the trains to do work elsewhere. This meant that trucks were going to have to do the grain haulage. Trains take 1/3 of the amount of diesel to cut the same mass, the same distance as trucks do. 1/3. Or, to put it another way, using trucks to do the grain cartage was going to use 3 times the diesel. Trains also require less drivers for a given amount of cartage relative to trucks. Trains are objectively far more productive at moving grain than trucks. The use of trucks also puts a lot of wear and tear on the roads, and increased truck traffic represents an increased safety risk. So there are reasons beyond just productivity for wanting the grain carted by the trains. Even just using the productivity argument though, the government could have bought the trains and track rights back with its money creation ability, so not even using tax dollars. It could have just operated the railway itself. This would have generated no harm in the economy, especially in the situation of a modern monetary configured economy. Some might argue, well, what about the truck drivers getting less work? Well, they survived in previous seasons, but even if we put that aside, in the modern monetary economy, in a worst case scenario, even if the truck companies had to lay some drivers off, everyone still has a full-time job if they want it, via the job guarantee. In a modern monetary economy though, things are aimed to be fairly fully utilised, so it's unlikely that anyone would have needed to be put off. What about government spending? Could that have caused inflationary problems? No, this is extremely unlikely, since the operation of the train would have used far less diesel than in the case of using trucks, and that in itself is deflationary. Basically, there would have been a number of wins and no losses. As we have seen, government plays an important role facilitating productivity via the use of both taxation-related spending power and new money creation spending power. This is why people should see the government as something they're happy to support via tax. I'm not saying that the government is perfect and that no money is ever wasted, but I am saying that by continually shrinking its spending power from taxes, the less it can help all of us by improving productivity and making the world better. Further, the government can afford, and I use that in the loosest sense, considering we're talking about a money issuer, to take riskier, long horizon of return investments that the private sector is reluctant to do. There are many examples about this already in circulation, like how most of the so-called innovations in Apple's first smartphone can be traced back to the public sector research. Same with a large range of technologies associated with the internet. The government can always pay for everyone in the country to work, so at least some of them should be set up to work on potentially blind alley / potentially gold mine basic research. The ones that end up gold mines are often a boon for productivity, for the economy, and therefore for society. Righto, a quick summary. Remember, in productivity, everything counts, even non-priced things. Many of the improvements involve looking after people in society better and helping them to learn more. The job guarantee would be the first choice and best option for doing this, though there are obviously many other areas we can improve that would also assist. The remainder of productivity improvement tends to be done by science and making good decisions. Whenever productivity is increased, it allows the government to have more non-tax-based spending power. The government itself is a significant player in productivity, and this should be noted and set up to succeed. So productivity increase is a powerful thing for an economy, as it not only represents better use of all our resources, which helps out the environment, but is also one of 3 possible avenues that allows us to have government spending power beyond that from tax take, and so is a handy extra tool in our economic toolbox of things for making the future better. Thank you for listening. Bye.